Hi, it's me, Lily. I have to be sure to introduce myself now because I realized that some of you guys were not able to intuit my name. Straight to the point. Yes, emotional eating definitely exists. Boom, video over. We'll elaborate. I myself was affected with emotional eating for over half of my life, and many of those years were spent listening to people in the high-carb vegan community tell me that emotional eating was fake, and that it was just a matter of me not eating enough calories. While yes, it is extremely important in cases of emotional eating to get enough calories because you will never be able to progress if you don't, there are about 2,753 other factors to consider when talking about emotional eating. Because once we understand the physiological mechanisms of emotional eating, we'll see that the line between what's in the mind and what's in the body, emotional and physical, just doesn't exist. And this isn't some spiritual woo-woo idea. Don't worry, I'm not going to use the word quantum. But this separation between mind and body literally doesn't exist, because as soon as we feel anything, have any emotion, a lightning-fast hormonal, chemical, electrical response takes place that makes our emotions a physical reality inside our bodies. It happens when we eat anything. A cascade of hormones and chemicals happens that creates an emotional response in our body to the food that we just ate. So let's establish right away that addictions, all addictions across the board, are not about pleasure-seeking behavior. Yes, addiction is a compulsive seeking behavior, but the seeking is not for pleasure, it is to avoid pain, to compulsively seek out anything that will take away pain, be it emotional or physical. Since it is an absolute fact that foods, especially hyper-palatable junk foods, causes neurotransmitter cascades that affect the pleasure centers of our brains, that more and more of these foods will be required to create the same neurotransmitter effect in the brain in the future, and that if these foods are taken away, we experience an emotional and physical withdrawal. I'm going to conclude that it is absolutely possible for food addictions to exist and for us to engage in emotional eating behavior. This is especially true of foods that are specifically craved during stressful periods of time. Because in the presence of stress hormones like cortisol, when food is ingested, glucocorticoids are released. And these chemicals significantly increase the dopamine response in your brain. The first time this happens, it would create a sense of euphoria. But because of the extra high dopamine levels, dopamine receptors in your brain would begin to downregulate. This means that your body makes fewer dopamine receptors active as a way to counteract the dopamine response. However, you, as a naturally pleasure-seeking organism, are now programmed to want that extra big dopamine hit, because who doesn't love euphoria, right? But due to the dopamine receptor downregulation, it'll take an even larger dose of hyper-palatable junk foods and an even larger dose of stress hormones to create a reaction that's anywhere near comparable. And even if you do manage to achieve that same level of euphoria, please rest assured that your body is already busy further down-regulating your dopamine receptors to ease the response. So as you can see, this is a completely natural cycle that just results in people consuming more and more nutrient-void, calorie-dense, hyper-palatable junk food. Not only that, but it actually encourages people to work themselves up into a very stressed state before they eat, because it'll help them to get that extra large dopamine reaction that they're looking for. I remember when I was ass deep in an eating disorder, and on some level I realized that if I got myself really stressed out and oh my god and frantic, that first bite of food would just taste so much more fucking amazing. And it was so goddamn frustrating to try to control that part of me that just wanted the big dopamine hit. To understand food addictions and emotional eating, we're also going to have to talk about the difference between fuel and energy. So our bodies have two sources of power. There's fuel, which comes from your food, and it does things like power your muscles all day. And then there's energy, which you could also call nervous energy, because it's present in your nervous system and it's recharged every night as we sleep. We use the second type of energy to digest our food and process emotions. So guess what happens when we overload our digestive system with a huge amount of food? Yeah, our capacity to process emotions is severely retarded. Thumbs up for non-offensive use of the word retarded. So you know that feeling you get when you eat a really big meal and then suddenly things just don't seem like such a big deal and you're kind of just numb. Yeah, that's That's a real thing. Now, there are many other ways that food affects us socially, emotionally, and physically, but in the interest of not making another 20-minute video, we're just going to kind of gloss over those since we now have the basics and just accept that emotional eating obviously exists. Now, why do we feel so powerless against it? What are people doing wrong? First of all, they're making improper food choices. They aren't eating enough nutrient-dense foods. They aren't eating the foods that our bodies were designed to thrive on. They're eating hyper-palatable junk foods made up of processed sugar, sodium, and a lot of extra fat. And all of these people who gain weight from these hyper-palatable junk foods are then encouraged to go on diets, and almost all diets encourage you to go on a severely calorie-restricted plan to force your body to use its own fat. People are trying so hard to lose weight by restricting their calories to some number under 2,000, usually around 1,200, which is just ungodly. When your body gets so starved of caloric input, it makes your brain go crazy for food. That's where the cravings come from. No one can naturally resist the cravings a starving brain produces. There is no amount of willpower in the world that can counteract a starving brain. Restriction sets you up for huge, out-of-control binges on high-calorie and high-fat food, which, as we talked about a moment ago, creates this cascade of neurotransmitter release and then receptor downregulation, which sets you up for an addictive pattern. In most cases of food addiction and binge eating disorder, the people affected the most were those who restricted calories or restricted certain foods at certain times. This is not a coincidence. These calorie-restrictive diets are setting us up for more binges, more weight gain, more addictions. In the case of emotional eating and addictions, stress and trauma also plays a huge role. Simply starving ourselves of food is fortunately not enough to create, emotional eating patterns and food addiction, because our lives are so frantic and filled with drama that it is almost impossible to get through even one single day without some kind of stress meltdown. That is, unless you're only friends with your dogs like I am.
Ow!
So now we have all of these half-starved, psychologically deranged, stressed-out people running around at frantic fucking speeds, and the only logical outcome is that we're going to traumatize each other. Most humans that are living in developed countries are at the same time starved and overfed, frantic yet overmedicated, and chronically traumatizing each other because we ourselves were traumatized. It's not a good situation for health. So as you can hopefully see, emotional eating is definitely a real thing, and it cannot be controlled through strict willpower. But, and this is a big but, okay? This does not make you a helpless victim, and the responsibility of changing your behavior is still yours. So how do we fix it? First and foremost, I cannot stress this enough, you absolutely, positively have to eat the right foods. High carb, low fat, whole plant foods. At least 2,200 to 3,000 calories every day for someone my size that's 5'4", 115, 20 pounds. But the unbelievable part for most people is that you have to eat that same amount of food even if you're trying to lose weight. You have to eat consistently every single day, at least 3 to 4 meals every day, and you have to keep them at regular intervals. Some people, especially those who are obese or overweight, have metabolic damage, have hunger and satiation sensing issues, find it really helpful to schedule their meals and make sure that they eat them at regular intervals to allow their body to heal to a point where they can actually sense if they're hungry and they can actually sense when they're full. Making sure that you eat regularly will help to heal your metabolic damage and allow all of your appetite regulating mechanisms to return to normal. You also have to avoid hyperpalatable junk foods. Just tasting these foods will recreate the addiction and the emotional issues all over again. Remember that in the battle of starvation versus willpower, willpower will always lose. In addition to eating enough of the right foods, you have to dig up your past trauma. I recommend doing it with a professional that you trust, because you will never, ever, ever be able to make any deep, meaningful, or lasting changes in your behavior if you don't address the underlying forces that are shaping your internal landscape. I wish I could give you some kind of like quick tips for doing this, but everybody has a very unique healing process in front of them because they have all had very unique experiences throughout their lives, and you just gotta purge that shit. All I can say is that journaling, vulnerability, and honesty will take you a long way. And expect this process to take a long time because emotional progress is not a linear experience. In addition to eating the right foods and processing your trauma, you also need to allow yourself to have enough time in your daily life to relax, enjoy, de-stress. Remember that in the battle between stress, drama, and frenemies versus willpower, willpower will always lose. I honestly hope that this has been a helpful discussion for you guys. Thumbs up if it has been. As we can see, emotional eating obviously does exist. So don't listen to anyone that tells you otherwise. You listen to your own process, you get fucking real about it, and you make good choices for yourself. If you want to beat emotional eating, you absolutely positively have to do the things that I have outlined in this video. You have to eat enough. You have to deal with your repressed trauma, and you have to take time for yourself. Okay. If you guys have any questions about emotional eating, you can reach me in the comments section below. I will very happily answer those. And as always, thank you guys for watching. It is time to take full responsibility for your own health and happiness. Nobody else is gonna do it. Let's get out there, make some better choices for ourselves. You guys take care, and I will see you soon.